Hello, I'm here with Dr. Temple Grandin. She's a doctor of animal science and professor at Colorado State University. She's a best-selling author and a person with high-functioning autism. Thank you for joining us here at the University of California, Irvine, and Disability Services for our Disability Awareness Week, or actually Disability History Week. And thank you for coming and agreeing to do this interview with us this afternoon.
Well, one of my biggest concerns is all the smart, quirky kids get a label, they're kind of different, and they don't have teachers to get them motivated. One of the things that really helped me when I was in high school was my science teacher. When I was like messing around, didn't want to study, he got me interested. And I was just over at your lab where you have all the 3D printers. That was so super cool. It's the kind of stuff you got to show the kids that are kind of different. So they'll get interested in something like that.
Yes, we did. We talked about that this afternoon a little bit. And before we get into the meat of our interview, I wanted to ask you to share with me a little bit about your disability and how that's impacted you.
Well, autism is a very big spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum, you have a child that's going to remain nonverbal, they have epilepsy, he's not going to go to college. Other end of the spectrum, you got half of Silicon Valley, Steve Jobs, Einstein, who didn't talk until age 3. And so it's a real big spectrum. And a little bit of this so-called disability is actually an advantage, because you wouldn't have any TV cameras to do this interview on if you didn't have a little bit of autistic traits. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't have any electric lights because Tesla, who invented the power plant, would have been labeled autistic. I'm a total visual thinker. I think completely in pictures. That helped me in my work with animals because obviously they don't think in words.
Okay. You'd mentioned Einstein in your response, and as he, from what I understand, he is one of your heroes. Can you explain to me why?
Well, he was kind of a different kind of guy. I mean, boy, back when he was growing up, to have the kind of hair he had, that certainly wasn't men's style for hair.
Now, how did you feel about him? And you'd mentioned a little bit about his disability, about not being able to speak. And how's that inspirational to you?
Well, I thought, well, maybe if he can do it, I can. I've had a picture of Einstein up on my wall ever since graduate school. I also had this Alan Ashley Pitt thing on creativity that basically kind of says that when you're different, when people finally realize you were right, they'll say it's obvious all along, and you can either fade into the mainstream or you can do what only you can do. Alan Ashley Pitt probably didn't say the quote right. It's Alan Ashley Pitt on creativity. Mm-hmm. That's been on my wall since graduate school.
Wow, okay. Obviously with Albert Einstein being one of your inspirations, recently you spoke at a TED conference in 2010 in a talk called "The World Needs All Kinds of Minds." It was a full house, and the video online has been viewed over 1.3 million times. What are your thoughts on becoming an inspirational person like Albert Einstein is to you?
Well, I hope that I inspire kids that are kind of quirky and different that they can achieve. I was definitely one of those kind of kids that was different. I got kicked out of high school when I was in 9th grade for throwing a book. That was not a good thing. And one of the things that really got me turned around was my science teacher. Mentor teachers, they can make such a difference. Also, you got to show kids interesting things. Like I went out and I saw your lab today where you do all the 3D printing. Well, that's the kind of thing you need to show kids in middle school. Mm-hmm. And they go, when I grow up, I can make all kinds of cool stuff with that. But if you don't show kids interesting things, they don't get interested in interesting things. And we have a need in this country for more kids doing manufacturing and engineering stuff.
Right, okay. Also in that same conference, the way you described your mind is it's Google for pictures. Can you please explain that statement for?
Well, everything I think about is in pictures. Okay, for example, when I mentioned the 3D printing lab, I'm seeing pictures in my mind of a 3D printing lab. I'm also seeing a 3D printing machine that I saw at another place. I see pictures. Everything in my mind is accessed as a picture. Now, another kind of thinker is the mathematician mind. They are the pattern thinker. Think patterns rather than pictures. That's the mathematicians. These kids sometimes have a little trouble with reading. For me, algebra was absolutely impossible. And one mistake that was made in my math education is that we didn't jump to geometry and trig. Now, the thing is, you need to have the engineering mind and the visual thinking mind working together.
Right.
Because let's say you take something like making an iPhone. I mean, Steve Jobs was the artist, but the engineers have got to make the inside of the phone work.
Right. Okay. We're going to go a different direction here, and let me ask you this. I imagine you get a lot of parents asking for advice about how to support their children with autism. What is your advice to those students or to
Well,
those
it
parents?
depends upon what age the child is. If the child's 3 years old and he doesn't talk, you're going to need 20 hours a week or more of early one-to-one teaching, lots of intensive teaching. I'm going to give that advice as the same. As the kids get older, I'm going to say develop their strengths. Okay, they might get other labels, maybe ADHD, dyslexia, all these different labels they get. And these labels are not accurate. They're just behavioral profiles. They're not even scientifically accurate. They're not accurate like, okay, I understand a chancellor is an eye doctor. Well, he can very precisely diagnose some eye disease. Then, say, well, you have got this, and it's very clear. That's not the way these labels work. And what you want to do is take the thing that the kid's good at and develop it. Good at art, develop it. Good at math, develop it. Good at writing, develop it. And they got to learn how to use those skills so that they can get a career when they grow up.
In some of our conversations this afternoon and this morning, you'd mentioned that one of the problems is the fixation on disability. Can you go into that a little more?
I'm worried about where a child's fixation becomes their autism. I get very upset when I see a bright 10-year-old walk up to me at the book table and they want to talk about their autism. When I was 10 years old, I wanted to talk about building a tree house or talk about something I had made. I get concerned where autism becomes the fixation. Now, I get asked all the time if I could snap my fingers and not be autistic, would I do that? I would like to remain autistic because I like the logical way I think. But being a college professor and a scientist comes first, and autistic second. And I get worried when a person totally defines themselves by a disability. Because I read in one of the news magazines that Chief Justice Roberts has epilepsy, and he actually lost his license for a while because of epilepsy. He doesn't walk up to people and say, my name's John Roberts, and tell you about my epilepsy. Mm-hmm. See, the problem that we've got with a lot of these disabilities is a very variable. And at one end of the spectrum, you've got persons not going to be going to college or getting a high-level job. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got people that are super bright.
Now, as far as our student population here at UC Irvine, many of them have reported that the students with Asperger's of being bullied in school. Were you bullied as a child?
Oh yes, I had a terrible time in high school. High school was the worst part of my life. I absolutely hated high school, bullied, and the places where I was not bullied was the special interests, horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. That's why we've got to get kids interested in interest groups. Take fixations and channel them. The kid likes history, well, let's take an advanced history course. They like math, or they like trains, let's read about trains, do math with trains, build on it. And you got to show kids interesting things like the 3D printers, because if they're not exposed to it, then they're not going to be fixated on it. Get them fixated on 3D printers, they can turn that into a career, but you got to show them that stuff.
Right. Now, any other advice to students who have been bullied that you'd want to communicate to them?
Well, I had a terrible time, and I recommend getting involved with other students that have shared interests, because those were places where there was no bullying. Now, the bad thing now is now they can text the kid's phone and be saying bad things. At least when I was at horseback riding, I was free of being bullied.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You'd also just mentioned a little bit about shared interest and how the socialization aspect of that is helpful for students with autism. Can you go into a little more of that in detail?
Well, you have a shared interest, you've got something you can do together. When I was in college, I actually went to school talent show, and I said there was some teasing going on at college. Again, that is shared interest. We want to really work on this shared interest thing. I had a mom call me up and her 14-year-old wanted to join the, or 12-year-old, I don't remember which, I think it was 12 years old, join the 4-H club to raise rabbits. Mm-hmm. And the mom was afraid to enroll the kid, and I said, sign him up right now. You got to stretch them. See, the thing is, you got to stretch them a little bit. Encourage them to try new things. And oftentimes they try new things and they find out that they really like it, but no surprises.
Right, right. Now, one of the interesting statements that you've made today and the time that you've been with us here is you mentioned that you believe that in schools things are getting too abstract and people aren't doing hands-on stuff. Can you explain what you mean by that comment?
Well, I think the verbal thinkers have totally taken over, because there's kind of three kinds of minds. And when I did that TED talk, I talked about visual thinking, picture thinking, like my kind of thinking. I talked about the mathematics kind of mind, and I talked about verbal thinking. And I think the verbal thinkers are taking over too much, and they're just kind of discounting the hands-on things. I think it's terrible that schools have shut down their automobile shop, wood shop, metal shop, sewing, cooking, all of these kinds of things. Because these practical classes, they teach practical problem-solving skills too. They get kids interested in things that can become careers. You need the hands-on things.
Right, okay. In reviewing your talk, you emphasized the importance of mentors for students with autism. Why is that so?
Well, mentors are important for a lot of different things. But you also have the dyslexic kids, the ADHD kids. Don't get too hung up on all these labels. And I notice a lot of people get locked into the label. And then the kid becomes the label. And that is something I'm really concerned about. And I was goofing around in school. I didn't see any reason to study. My science teacher got me interested in studying because I had the goal of wanting to become a scientist.
Excellent. What words of encouragement would you give to students with disabilities or students with autism pursuing education?
Well, you need to find something you're good at. The other thing is you got to think about, what are you going to do after you graduate? I have seen too many smart kids that are different, graduating from college, they can't get jobs. And one of the problems is they never learn any work skills. Where are all the old kids with mild autism and Asperger's or ADHD or dyslexic? They managed to all get employed. And one of the reasons they managed to get employed is because when they were 12 years old, they had a paper route. And I think one of the things that's really important is kids need to be learning work skills. And kids that have a difference, they need to be learning, it's more important for them to learn those work skills. When I was 13, I had a sewing job. When I was 15, I cleaned out the stalls for 8 horses. Then I made signs and sold them. I worked in a research lab one summer in college. So by the time I graduated, I had a lot of work skills.
Great. What are some of your thoughts on centers like our Disability Services Center and the role of support they have for students?
Well, there's certainly students that are going to need support. I had to be tutored all through math, and I had to hunt down my own tutors. But on the other hand, I heard about a boy that was in college, and the disabilities office made a schedule for him each semester. Well, eventually he's going to have to learn how to make his own schedule. I think it'd be appropriate for the disabilities office to first semester make the schedule. Next semester, ask him to try to make the schedule and then show it to the disabilities office, and then gradually wean it off. Because we've got to think our ultimate goal is we got to get them out there as working in the workplace and supporting themselves. And unfortunately, a lot of parents coddle their kids too much, and I'm seeing kids that are a lot less severe than me that don't know how to do basic shopping. They don't know how to shake hands. They haven't been taught some of the most basic skills. See, in the 50s, all kids were taught those skills.
Right.
Well, and you see, and today I think that's hurting the Asperger kids and the autistic kids more than it hurts the normal kids.
Okay. And my final question for you is, obviously there is a movie out about your life, and how does it feel to have a movie about you?
Well, I remember going and watching the movie at the HBO's corporate office, and it was like going in the 60s and 70s time machine. I often get asked about how do I feel about all the attention, and I consider it a responsibility. I've got lots of letters and lots of emails, lots of young kids, and I hope that I'm going to inspire them. I really like the fact that the movie showed all my work things. All the work things in the movie are accurate. I actually built all the things, designed all the things that were shown in the movie. And we want to show that a kid that's kind of different can get out and really do things. We got to show what people can do. One thing I really liked about the Paralympics is it really showed what a double amputee can do. You can still do sports, you can still do stuff. I'm seeing sometimes people getting too much into their disability. And I'm a professor first and autistic second. But autism is an important part of who I am, but I'm not going to let autism totally take over my life. People say, why don't you just quit teaching your classes and quit doing your animal auditor training. I'm an auditor trainer for animal welfare auditors because that's my profession. And just yesterday I was on the phone and my publicist for my next book wanted to book a book tour in the middle of Paco animal auditor training. I go, no, no, I might cancel something else, but I'm not canceling that. That is stuff, that's some of my main professional stuff, and I think it's very important that I have my profession first, and the autism stuff then comes secondary.
Excellent. Would you like to share with us any final parting thoughts?
We got to help kids really be all that they can be. And I get worried about the labels, especially on the higher end of the spectrum, where there's not enough expectations to do things. Because I'm seeing too many young children where the most basic things, like shaking hands, learning how to, how to shop, how to order food in a restaurant, they haven't been taught some of those basic things. And the thing that drives me crazy is I move back and forth between, okay, the autism world, and then I go out and I visit a USDA lab, or I visit a meat packing plant or someplace like that. It's all full of old people on the spectrum with ADHD and dyslexia and mild autism, and they have jobs at my age, getting ready to retire, and they've managed to keep jobs all their life. This is what makes me just kind of go crazy. And then I see Junior coming up to me. He's 10 years old, and he's headed to the basement, addicted to video games. He's going to play video games with Social Security in the basement, and that makes me, it just makes me insane. It's sort of like the older ones made it. See, what's happened in this whole thing with, with the things like developmental disorders, is that today the services is so much better for the real severe ones. The severe ones before were put in institutions. When I was a young kid, I would have been put in an institution because I had no speech, I had all the full-blown symptoms. But you take the milder person with autism, I think sometimes they're having more trouble today because they're becoming the label instead of becoming a mathematician working for the USDA.
Well, that concludes all our questions. I thank you so much for taking the time here with us today and for coming to UC Irvine.
Okay.
And we're done.
Okay.